Welcome once again to the Just Steward Podcast. I'm Doug Connolly, and I'm here with
Michael Frigon.
and we're a podcast that's about preparing the next generation materially and physically, intellectually, spiritually, most importantly, for all the challenges that lie ahead. Since previous generations, ours included, haven't always done the best job. And we are here with our guest, Dr. J. Budziszewski from the University of Texas at Austin, my alma mater. Doctor, did I get your name right?
Yes, Budziszewski, you've got it.
We certainly, I was first made aware of you about when I first moved here by my friend who's an author here. She's written more books, but Layla Miller. She mentioned Dr. Budziszewski, and I was like, I've never heard of him, but I went to UT. And that's, again, shows how completely uninformed I am, because you've got a great body of work. You've done awesome work there, and you have a new book. We're going to talk about that. We'll get to that in a moment. But for intros, Doctor, what would you like to say as an intro for you, or I can do it for you?
Go ahead and do it for me. If I want to add anything, I can,
Well, you got your PhD from Yale, is that correct?
That is right. In 1981. I've been at the post for a long time.
And yes, and you've been at UT all that time, right?
All that time. That's right. There were two jobs in my field that might have been appropriate that year, and I interviewed for both, and I didn't get the other, so I came here.
All right. And then I count about 14 to 15 or 16 books that you've written, and the most recent of which is Pandemic of Lunacy, that's in a publishing house, published by a group that is run by another former guest of ours, Jeremy Beer, who's a mutual friend of ours and also a graduate of the University of Texas. And that's
Yes.
your most recent book. We're going to talk about that today. You've got a website, The Underground Thomist. And I think one question I would like to ask to begin with before we get to the book is, like a lot of people who are Catholic, I have a little bit of a complex relationship with my alma mater, the University of Texas. I'm very loyal to them. I root for them on Saturdays in the fall, but I've kind of gotten used to sort of winking, nodding, and shrugging at the campus insanity that goes on there and everything else.
Yes.
But if I take a step back, I have to admit, between the work you're doing, the Civitas Institute with Justin Dyer, who used to be a friend of mine I knew from my days in Austin, Mark Regnerus is doing, Rob Coons, I think, is another one. There actually is a lot of really solid work being done by people at the University of Texas. What's that like on the inside, and what's in the water?
Well, when I first, years and years ago, at the time that I was hired here at the University of Texas, I was really crazy. I talk about lunacies in my book, but I was really a lunatic myself. I didn't think that there was a real difference between good and evil. I didn't believe in God. All kinds of things like that. I didn't think that my decisions were in my control, so that personal responsibility was an illusion. Now, when I came back to faith, or when God brought me back to faith, one of the things that hit me was I'm all alone here. There might have been some other Christians, but they were in hiding, right? They were in the closet. I discovered that there were other Christians, and they weren't all in hiding, and that has been a life raft. That has been a lifesaver. People try to go it alone, and we're social beings. God made us social beings. You can't go it alone. So that has been actually a wonderful thing. The university can often be, even though it's in better shape than most public universities, can often be like a secular wasteland. But when you have friends that you can talk about these things in a sane way and in a faithful way, that makes all the difference.
Another name, I don't know if he's still teaching there, but Dr. Bonavac, I think, is there as well.
Yes. I haven't talked to Dan for about a year, but I haven't heard that he's not here anymore.
No, I think he still is, because actually I just ran into a seminarian who graduated from UT, who I think said they had Dr. Bonavac, so I think he's still there.
He's great. All those guys that you mentioned are my friends. They're all terrific.
That's great. That's great to hear on the inside. Do you have any friends that are on the opposite, like close friends on the opposite end of the political aisle there?
Close makes it difficult, not because I repel them or refuse to be friends with them, but because people on the other side often refuse to be friends with people who are socially conservative or with people of faith. They often get angry about these kinds of things, and they will cut you off. So I don't have any close friends, but I try to be on friendly terms with colleagues and with others. Every now and then there will be a colleague who admits that he actually does believe in God, or does believe that there's a real right and wrong or something like this. We'll have lunch together, but he's but he's one who's sort of in the closet and he wants to keep it quiet.
Okay.
So since I'm not really quiet, I can sometimes make even folks like that a little bit uncomfortable, although I try not to them either.
Understood. I have one jumping off point. I want to start with something. We could start large, but there was one insight in your book. I just got it 13 days ago, so I'm 2/3 the way, 3/4 the way through it. So I'm
Okay.
going to finish it. For someone with 6 kids, that's not bad.
That's not bad at all.
Yeah. But one thing struck out to me, and again, we'll just get right into it. You talk about a ton of things, everything from transhumanism to sexuality to belief in God. But one very material, salient point you made on page, this might have been the most provocative thing you said, and you qualify it even, but on page 84 regarding cohabitation.
Oh, yes.
This was great because you said that one of the reasons cohabitating is so awful for women is because, well, say it in your own words. You know where I'm going with this. I think it's a great point, and as I've thought a lot about cohabitation, and it's an awful arrangement for all involved long term for a variety of reasons. But I never heard this point made
Yeah, I don't remember which point I made about cohabitation that you're referring to,
about
but
how
I know the
men get more
chapter.
status as they get older.
Oh yeah, as men get more status, if they aren't in a committed marriage, if they don't have that commitment to their wives, they may start looking for women that give them greater status, which are going to be younger women. You know, you hear of trophy wives and things like that. So here you're getting older, the guy's getting older, and commonly when men get older, they're even sometimes considered more attractive. As women are getting older, they're considered less attractive. So they're at a terrific disadvantage in these relationships that are not marital. It's cohabitation in many ways. Since you don't have a commitment, it's like practicing for divorce. The relationships that began in cohabitation are less stable. Such people have less stable marriages. I'm not just saying that as some prejudice. This is what the research backs up. So it's especially hard on women. Now, if you're married to the woman, you love her, she's your wife. And do you understand what marriage is all about? It's different. You're both getting old together. You look at her face, she looks at yours, you both have some wrinkles in them, but those wrinkles tell you about some memories together. And men's wives are beautiful to them.
One of the things that I've always thought about cohabitation is that it's I think that you see a couple, let's say they're not Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell, and they actually break up after, after 8 years or something like that. And then people might be tempted to think, well, they broke up. See, it wasn't meant to be. A good thing they didn't get married. Well, I look at it exact opposite. Marriage is a supernatural covenant, and it's designed to keep you there when nature would tell you to leave. Anything that is not bound by marriage, nature will take its course. The man accumulates more dating capital, as you pointed
Yeah.
out, the women less, and it's going to break up. Probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, I'd like to tweak that just a little bit. I
Sure.
wouldn't say it's not in our nature. I wouldn't say that nature militates against it. The fallenness of our nature militates against it. It's not the way we were designed, which is our nature. It's the fact that some things in our nature are broken, that our appetites, our passions are not under the control of reason, and that in turn, and our intellect in turn under the control of God. That's what causes the problem. And also, a lot of people, even people who say, "Oh yeah, I do want to get married," they don't really think clearly about what marriage is. They don't take their oath seriously. For instance, how many people at the altar these days, when they say "till death do us part," really mean "till death do us part"? How many what they say in sickness or in health? Well, what many people are thinking is as long as it is still cool for both of us. And so when things get rough, maybe you're having a spot of trouble in your marriage, you're not getting along, you think that there's a back door open and I can escape. You have to close that back door, and then you have an incentive to work on your problems with each other, and you discover, you know what? They weren't the end of the world, and your marriage is stronger, and that's good. I don't know any. Now, not every married couple will speak with you about these things. They're very personal. But among those I know who have spoken personally about them, I don't know anyone who has never had any difficulty in their marriage at all. One woman told me once that she and her husband had fallen out of love with each other, but fell in love with each other again. This is the thing. We think, oh, I'm not in love. I don't have that romantic feelings. I don't feel like I'm a teenager. So it's all over. You actually learn deeper and more multidimensional aspects of love if you stick with it, stick in there, hang in there. This is a commitment that you made.
So what is your advice to, I guess, both young people and maybe parents who have people who are becoming, young adults? Maybe they're not religious or at least not Catholic, not Christian.
Uh-huh.
What do you tell them in terms of, because we kind of argue from our belief system. We
Of
argue
course.
based on what we know to be true. And
Yes.
you're dealing with people of all across the spectrum. I'm sure you're getting questions from people that are not religious. So what do you tell them in terms of how to prepare them to make these kind of decisions, or help them to prepare their children to make those type of
Well,
decisions?
there are a couple of different aspects to this. Somebody says, well, gee, I can see from how that might be true from the point of view of your faith. But if I don't believe that, if I don't believe in God, for instance, if I don't believe in his grace, what does this say to me? Well, there's a couple of things that it really ought to say to them. One is maybe you should consider whether God does exist and whether his grace is real. Even the sociologists, even the secular sociologists are finding that faith-based marriages are much much more healthy. Maybe you should think about that. I know of a case where the great psychologist Paul Vitz was speaking about his book, Faith of the Fatherless, about atheism among young men who grew up without their fathers or with a deficient relationship with the father. A man in the audience got up and said after the Q&A began, said, Dr. Vitz, I understand what you're talking about. He says, but you could be talking about me. I had a bad relationship with my father. I don't believe in God. And maybe your analysis helps to explain that. But now I'm a father. How would you advise me? And it might have been one of these come to Jesus moments. It wasn't. And a lot of people were angry at Vitz because he didn't do that. What he said, I think it was wonderful. He said, he thought for a moment and he said, well, I think I would advise you to just be the very best father that you possibly can. And the guy stood there for a moment as though this had never occurred to him as the right response. And then he said, thank you. That was very helpful. And he sat down, and I wasn't present, but I'm told that the entire auditorium burst out in cheerful applause, just as lacking faith in God can make it difficult to be a father, difficult to have a good relationship with your father. So also trying to be a good father can bring you closer to God because you begin to understand God the Father. And I think that that works in both directions. But, I tell people, can we be good without God? Can we really be good without God? It isn't just a matter of greater certainty or I have the religious sanction, oh, you'll go to hell if you don't do this or something like that. But I need help. And in the life of faith and the life of grace, you're experiencing that help every day. It doesn't mean you're not going to fall. It doesn't mean you're not going to sin, but you're experiencing that help every day. And it's very real. And I think that people should think about that.
Definitely. I mean, I think we all see, or I've noticed, at least I can speak for myself, especially culturally, we're seeing a lot of good trends, with the bad trends as well on, many people who are maybe, moving towards supporting family values, what they call family values, or a lot
Yes.
of things that were considered socially conservative. I think, like, well, first of all, great. Yeah, that's awesome that they're doing that. And then the kind of negative part of me thinks, it's like, well, they're trying to, be good without God. They try to argue
Okay.
for these things in a way that takes God out of it, and which makes it almost impossible. I mean, not impossible, but very difficult at least.
Very difficult. Well, look, I'd rather that somebody try to be good without God than not try to be good without God.
What's your analysis of that situation? Do you think that that's the step to that, or that it's just another excuse to stay away from God?
Well, it can be an excuse. I mean, we have all kinds of excuses for staying away from God. We lie to ourselves in all sorts of ways. When I was a practical atheist, I say a practical atheist, meaning I wasn't a theoretical atheist who believed there was no God, then I can prove it. But I thought, I do think I can prove that if there is a God, he doesn't matter. That was one of my lies. I was lying to myself. I really knew deep down that that wasn't true. So people, yes, people do have all kinds of excuses. But on the other hand, we don't know what the state of their heart is. Maybe this isn't about an excuse, but maybe he's struggling. Maybe he's somebody who would like to believe it and he thinks, oh, that would be better for me, but wouldn't it all just be a crutch? Or wouldn't I be fooling myself? And you have to walk alongside those people and take them where they are. If somebody is just trying to be the very best that he can, look, he will hit the wall. C.S. Lewis even made that part of his argument for Christian faith in his book Mere Christianity. He said there are these two clues to the meaning of the universe. One is that there is this moral law and that we all recognize it, and the other is that none of us live up to it. And the disciplines of virtue, I try to be a courageous person, I try to be a just person, I try to be a temperate person, I try to do all of those kinds of things. They can get you a certain way, but they can't fix the inner disorientation, dislocation of the heart that was brought about by sin and by, in fact, that a long time ago by our first parents' rebellion against their maker. The divine surgeon has to come in there, and he's as Lewis again put it. He says the divine surgeon says this may hurt, and we have to say I need your surgery anyway, and it's worth it. So by trying and failing to be good without God, they may discover their need for God.
Now, regarding that, a lot of your work is related to Aquinas and natural law.
Yes.
So it was apparent to me, I had never really heard the term natural law until I moved here, and I was probably in my late 30s when that happened. I might have heard it. The first time it stuck was when I was listening to Nick Nickus, who runs the Bioethics Defense Center here in Phoenix. And
Yes.
he mentioned natural law and how they were having a lot of luck with law students teaching these Catholic principles to law students based on natural law principle. It was apparent to me around the time of the Trump election, and when I was still on Facebook, I'm not anymore, the first Trump election, when you say natural law to people who don't know what you're talking about, which includes a lot of liberals, they think you're talking about the laws of nature.
Yes.
For the unwashed, what is natural law?
I will tell you, but let me back up just a
Sure.
little bit. You mentioned having success with your law students. Most of my students right now, when I teach natural law, when I teach Thomas Aquinas, are actually law students, and only about half of them are Christian believers of various kinds. The others aren't, and they're interested, but they're seriously interested in this, and that's very encouraging. What is the natural law?
But I have a question. Is it taking with those students? Does the natural law take root?
Well, yeah, with a lot of them.
Okay.
Now, there is nothing that any teacher can do.
Yep.
So that the teaching brings about a chemical change in the brain of the student, and he says, "I believe this." But yes, they engage with you, and I don't worry too much about whether things don't seem to be taking root at the time. You know what Paul said? He said this one guy maybe planted this. One guy plants the seed, the other guy waters it, the other guy's there for the harvest. I may not be there for the harvest, but I have had people who've written to me sometimes a decade or more after I taught them and said it clicked.
And to that point, I think that we can't, someone who's convinced against his will is of the same opinion still.
Yes.
So I understand that we can't supernaturally convince people of things they don't want to be convinced of.
And we
But I
can't
do
bludgeon
think-
them.
Pardon?
And we can't bludgeon them. Agree
Bludgeon.
with me or you'll get a bad grade.
But
We
there
can't do
is
that.
something to be said for people coming to college and realizing conservatives and Catholics, and obviously the Catholic being much more important than the conservative, are not booger eaters who are just telling you to take it on faith alone. I think it is important that
Yes.
people, even if they're firmly against us, are put against these robust intellectual arguments so they know they exist, and we're
Yes.
being good ambassadors for the intellectual side of our faith.
It comes as a shock to many people. There's sort of two kinds of fundamentalism. There's the kind of fundamentalism that says, faith alone, don't give me any of that reason stuff. That's not the classical Christian view. The other kind of fundamentalism says, reason alone, don't give me any of that faith stuff. Well, if you say reason alone, how do you even know that reason works? Prove that if A implies B and B implies C, that A implies C. Prove that to me. I just have to take it as an axiom. I see that reason works. I perceive it. And that is a kind of a faith. It isn't religious faith, but it's a kind of a faith. We're using faith all the time. My faith in God is not just faith in a philosophical system concerning God. It's faith in a person. It's analogous to my faith in my wife. Can I give you a mathematical proof that she's as good and virtuous as a person as I think she is, and she'll never betray me? Well, no, but I trust her. I have faith in her. This is an everyday reality we all do, and the classical Christian view is that faith and reason are, as John Paul II put it, like the two wings of a bird. The bird needs both of them to fly. You actually have more material to work for your reason to work with if your faith calls your attention to things that you might have even perceived if you didn't have faith, but you didn't. It is a curious thing. But back to natural law. You wanted me
Yes,
to
I distracted you.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. Let's begin with, I like to speak of the four witnesses, the four ways that we know the natural law. The first witness is deep conscience. It's the law written on the heart. That's what St. Paul called it. He says even the Gentiles who don't know the law, he meant they don't know Torah, they don't know Jewish law, they've never heard of it. They sometimes do the right things and their consciences will accuse them and they'll even have a struggle in their conscience. He says because the law is written on their hearts. Now that law that is written on the heart and which is supplemented by other things that are also in the way that we're made in our nature. That's the natural law. Supplemented by other things in our nature. Well, like what? Well, like you can observe the way that you are, that, by the way, written in the heart means built into the natural pattern of the moral intellect. But how else is it natural? Well, think of the other aspects of our design. We are beings who are made for social life, not like cows that just hang around together in herds, or fish that swim in schools. We live together because for us, the good life isn't even good unless we can share it with others. That's what it means to be a social creature. We're made for friendship. We're made with a view to family. We're made, with a view to all kinds of things. We are made with a view to knowing the truth. And there are laws to all of these things. You discover the natural law. I should not betray my friends. Pretty soon I won't. And how do we, other than just the intuition of this, how else do we know this? Well, there are natural consequences. If I betray all my friends, I eventually won't have any friends. If I lie to others, I won't be believed. If I lie to myself, then I'm going to have to tell more lies to myself to cover up those lies to myself. Then I'm going to have to tell more lies to myself to cover up those lies to myself. And pretty soon I won't know if I'm coming or going. So we learn by deep conscience, the law written in the heart. We learn by the details of our design. Everything is in us is for something and has its own laws. And we learn from natural consequences. Still, one more thing is we look at our design, and it does look like it does that. We aren't just a blooming, buzzing confusion. It suggests that we are not merely the meaningless and purposeless result of a process that did not have us in mind, which points us to God, who is the source of all of this and the source of the grace which enables us to live according to it, and to whom we owe, this is another natural law, gratitude.
May take some of what you've been saying and take it a little different direction. Can you talk a little bit more about self-deception? You talk about that in the book and
Sure.
you mentioned it here. And I think that is just such a critical thing. I
Yeah.
mean, everyone does this to some degree. And even
Everyone does this.
Christians
Everyone
do.
does this.
C.S. Lewis talks about that in his books, about even Christians thinking that they're good, faithful Christians, and they're deceiving themselves.
Sure.
So what is your recommendation for people to break free of self-deception, both for those who maybe are not, I mean, basically when people have these belief systems, they're saying they're secular and they have, they say, I believe in reason, I don't believe in a God. And they don't really think about the consequences of what that thought means. That means then you're just a bunch of molecules and you don't have any value. So
Yes.
that type of thing, that's the self-deception. So yeah, take it from there. What do you think people should?
Well, I think one part of this is just trying to think more clearly. I think most of the time we deceive ourselves because we're not trying very hard to be honest with ourselves. We cut ourselves some slack. We allow ourselves certain deceptions. I always think of the old movie Gone with the Wind. Scarlett O'Hara in there will say, "I'll think about that tomorrow." It's one of the repeated classical lines in the movie. And well, this is how we are. I've done wrong to my friend. I'll think about that tomorrow. Self-deception can take several forms. One form that it can take is I try to bury my knowledge of the wrong that I did. I just try not to think about it, like Scarlett O'Hara. One other form that it can take is I do think about it, but I try to convince myself that it wasn't wrong. And conscience takes its revenge. Let's say, for instance, that I've treated my friend really unjustly, really badly, and my conscience is at me, but I do not want to repent. Well, one way to placate my conscience, which is the voice of God in me, is to repent, to confess to my friend. That's hard. I did wrong. I'm really sorry. I hope we can be reconciled. That's very hard. The other, though, which I delude myself into thinking this is easier, is I try to convince myself he really deserved it. He really deserved it. And if I convince myself that he deserved it, so that it was okay that I treated him badly, well, then what else? What follows from that? What follows from that is a person that bad, he deserves a lot of bad treatment. So I might start treating him even worse. I first came across that observation. We've talked about C.S. Lewis several times. He pointed out, he said, have you ever noticed that when you treat somebody badly, you start treating him worse and worse? And I thought, what? Yes, that's true. Why is that? I think this is why. It's the revenge of conscience. You can think of conscience as something like a traffic cop. The traffic cop is behind you. You're speeding, and if your will is in pretty good shape, you're going to pull over and let him give you a ticket and say, oh, gee, I shouldn't have done that. you accept the correction. And so that's with a healthy functioning conscience. But if you want to, there's another way of doing it. You may say, well, he's following me again. I've had so many tickets that they took away my license. If they catch me now, they're going to impound my car and they're going to put me in jail for a few days. And so I speed up to get away from the cop instead of letting him pull me over. And then maybe he accelerates and he's still after me. So I have to turn the wrong way down a one-way street. And then he's still after me. And now I'm really in big trouble. So I lean out the window of the car and I start shooting at him. Now we do that with our consciences too, and we dig ourselves deeper and deeper into
You just
wrong.
described my last year at UT, by the way.
Did I? Well, yeah, it describes some early episodes in my life too. Think about what you have to do in order to rationalize abortion, for instance. This is shooting at the cop. You can't not know. This is one of the things written on the heart. You can't not know that it's wrong to deliberately take innocent human life. So you're going to either have to try to convince yourself that it wasn't really deliberate. I had to do it, or it wasn't really a taking, or it wasn't really a life. The baby's not really alive. It's just sort of a clot of the tissue or something. Or you have to convince yourself that it isn't, that the baby isn't human. It is not a dog or a porpoise growing in there, or maybe not a human, but not really human because not a human person. What do you mean by a human person? Somebody who can communicate well and carry out plans. Well, born babies can't do that either. Neither can toddlers. Teenagers can't do it very well. Most of us are not very good at that until we're maybe 25. So are we not persons either? Or you have to say or you even have to say the baby deserves it. There was one book that was written by a feminist who argued this is the killer argument for abortion. She said this is going to end all the arguments between people who say they're pro-choice and people who say they're pro-life. We'll admit that it's wrong to deliberately take innocent human life, and it's a taking, and it's a life, and it's human, but it's not innocent. Because she says the fetus made the woman pregnant against her will and is an invader in her womb like a burglar who is violently aggressing against her. Now, if we go to those incredible lengths of lying to ourselves, because we all know better than that, incredible lengths like that to justify abortion to ourselves, man, maybe we need to look at ourselves more closely. But it is very painful, and the further we've gone along that path, the more painful it is. With people who are in that, you have friends who are in that self-deception. I'm thinking about myself when I was very desperately self-deceived. Most of the time, the person isn't going to listen, but you hang in there. You try to walk alongside this person and be there, because there is going to be a moment of crisis when some of the truth begins to leak through.
I have a
Maybe he
question
can
about
hear you.
this author you're talking about. Was she literally saying that the fetus was self-causing? Was it that?
Well, she didn't say that. She didn't say that she never said baby. She said that was a bad metaphor, but she said fetus. She never said that the fetus was deliberately making the woman pregnant against her will, that the fetus was intending to harm the mother, but she said that in fact it is doing this. To use the classical language, the baby was not formally at fault, but the baby was materially at fault. It was the baby's fault. And so, you deal with the baby like any other capital murderer. It may deserve execution.
It's carrying on modernity's war against nature to the human being, that nature is trying to restrict me, or I have to conquer nature, and even
Take for instance. Go ahead.
No, that's it. Yeah, that's
Yeah, take for instance what the abortion physician Warren Hearn, Hern, said in an article that he wrote for one of the Planned Parenthood journals. He was taught, the article was about reconceiving pregnancy as a disease. He said it may be socially constructed to be something desirable, but he said it is a disease. And so when you're having an abortion, all you're doing is ending the disease.
All this brings me to the problem is that we live in a post-logical society. What you think, the mere fact that this author thought this was an argument ender, first of all, we don't have any argument enders for the abortion debate. There aren't any. If there were, the pro-life cause would have them. But anyone can be as obstinate as they want against facts. But how do we handle a post-logical society? For instance, Lunacy 21 in your book, here it is. Hopefully you can see it. Pandemic lunacy. It might be in reverse on the
No, it's frontward.
It's frontward. Good. So I never know how it's going to come off. The Lunacy 21, reality doesn't have to be logical or make sense. And you begin with the story. I want you to remark to someone, I being you. do you realize that you've just taken an incoherent position? You say truth can't be known, all while supposing that you know it can't. I guess I'm being incoherent, he replied. After thinking a moment longer, he said, that's all right. The universe is incoherent, and I don't need to have any meaning in my life. Well, this is like doing, some people say nailing jello to a wall. I say trying to do judo in outer space. There's no purchase. So how do you deal with not, it's one thing to argue logic against people who at least subscribe to a system of logic, but when people who have all but abandoned any pretense of logic, where do you start?
Well, I'll tell you how I used to do it, and I'll tell you how I do it now.
Okay.
Confronted with a guy like that who said, well, reality doesn't have to make sense, and I don't need meaning or truth in my life. I used to think, oh my gosh, the poor guy doesn't know that yeah, reality is coherent and he does need meaning and truth in his life. And I would try to talk him into that, which would only play into his clever game. And I came to realize that a lot of this is a smokescreen. Nobody can really be illogical all the way down. What you can do by telling yourself an ideology that reality doesn't have to make sense is you just cut yourself some slack so that you don't have to think about the consequences of your actions or the implications of your actions very much, so that you aren't honest with yourself, you don't examine yourself, you don't examine these matters. You're giving yourself an excuse to be lazy. But no one can defy logic all the way down. And there isn't anybody who really at the bottom believes that things don't have to make sense. And so what I say now, and this is what I said to the young man, as I mentioned in the book, is I said, he had just said, I am incoherent. Yeah, you're right, but the reality is incoherent. Nothing has to make sense. I said, I don't believe you. I called him on it, I called his bluff. I said, I don't believe you. You know as well as I do that every created mind wants to know the truth and that you do need coherence and sense. So tell me, what is it that you want so much that you're willing to give up meaning and coherency in order to have it?
Sex.
Well, he didn't give me an answer, but he was floored because nobody had ever called him on his clever little evasion. Everybody says, oh, it is so difficult. Sophisticated people all really know that it's hard to know whether there's even a real reality at all. Well, no, that's it's only if you have a motivation for being irrational that you can be that irrational. And so he was floored, and for a couple of minutes, or I don't know, at least 20 seconds, 40 seconds, he was sort of knocked out of it. He didn't know what to say. Now, eventually, he got back onto the track of his cleverness, but I wouldn't engage that. And we don't have to answer everything that people say, because if somebody gives an honest question, you give an honest answer. If somebody poses an honest objection, you try to give an honest solution. But if somebody tries to blow smoke to set up a smoke screen, you can't do that. It just plays their game. What you have to do is try to blow away the smoke. And if they're not willing to do that, then you say, I don't know if we can have this conversation yet, because conversation is a mutual cooperative enterprise in pursuit of the truth. And if you don't believe in truth, then we're just quacking each other like ducks. It isn't even a conversation. So, when you're ready to have a real conversation, we can do that again.
I think you and I both agree that being clever is not a compliment in this day and age, the way you used it, because I take it to mean you're nihilistic, you're sarcastic, you're using very high school level debate tactics. When you say clever, and
that's how I mean clever.
You're
right?
detached. How do you view the word clever?
That I'm using it that way. When I say clever, I know that there's a different sense of the word clever, meaning you do something well and dexterously. But often we use the word, and that's how I use it in the book, to mean mere cleverness. You can wield the instruments of logic, but you don't wield them for the purpose that they're designed for, which is to actually come up with the thing. But I think that people are logical up to a point. They're just logical slowly. I once made the point in an article which I published in a journal, maybe it was First Things, I don't remember, and I was commenting on the fact that there's no surprise that people who promote abortion are becoming more and more extreme. Then the next thing that we will do, if we say that you can deliberately take innocent human life, is we're going to be having infanticide and abortion. And my editor said, no, 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 no. People are not that logical. People will not necessarily start justifying infanticide just because they justified abortion. And my reply was, and he allowed me to keep it in the article. My reply was, people are logical, but they're just logical slowly. Maybe you refused to draw that implication, but your kids will. And a generation later, people will be drawing that implication and saying, yeah, infanticide. One bioethics journal article which made waves a couple of years ago, was about what it called after-birth abortion. That was its term for infanticide. And the author made the perfectly logical point that if we justify all of the arguments that we use to justify abortion, and he was pro-abortion, all of the arguments that we use to justify abortion justify infanticide too. So we should just regard infanticide as post-birth abortion.
Is this a prominent philosopher at Princeton?
He was a prominent ethicist. Yeah, he's not. This was not probably the most prominent bioethicist in the world is Peter Singer of Princeton. This was not he. This wasn't him.
Okay. I've got before our final question, which Michael always handles. I've got another question, but I want to kick it to Michael before I ask my final question.
I was just going to say the historical evidence shows that the editor you're working with is probably wrong as well. I mean, you look at the French Revolution.
He was a very smart editor. I liked him. He was good.
I don't want to too much.
But he said, I don't think your readers are going to buy this point because people are not that logical.
Yeah, but I mean, the French Revolution, the Nazi Germany, like those are clear examples of the extremes that people go in the service of reason, and so to speak. Yeah, so
perverse reason. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
sure.
I mean, I feel like that's the whole story of modernity. It's perverse reason. It's realize, you can use the logical faculties of the human brain to rationalize anything if you don't have that root of morality to go off of, essentially.
Yeah, they say that people who are enmeshed in delusions, like I think I'm Napoleon, are very, very logical in arguing.
Yeah. I mean, was that Chesterton or was that Lewis? I know I think it was Chesterton that had some idea about that.
I don't know. Chesterton was great. The problem is you get to the point if you read enough Chesterton that anything that makes sense begins to sound like Chesterton to you, whether he said it or not.
No, I know he had something along those lines. I'll have to reread and see, but that's great. So yeah, Doug, sorry, go ahead and ask your question.
Well, my question is just what is it like to be a professor in this day and age? We all have those stories of my crazy professor had me do this. We tried to do woke mechanical engineering or something like that. But what's it like on the other with the shoes on the other foot? And you reference you do reference at least one screeching female in your class. Screeching's my word, but maybe not yours. But what is it like? How much deference do you get? Do most of the crazy self-select them out? What's a day in the life like being a sane professor at a university where not everyone is sane?
Well, there are some screaming men too, by the way. Okay. Although they usually show their anger in a different way. Yeah, well, I suppose there is some self-selection in my classroom. I have a higher proportion of students who are willing to listen to these things than probably other professors do, in part because sometimes they take my courses because they're fed up from other stuff from some of their other professors, or sometimes they take it because they've heard of natural law, and they want to know more about that. So this is to some extent a self-selected group, but there are a lot of people in there who are not amenable to this and who will and of that group, the ones who are not amenable to it, some will discuss their disagreements reasonably. They'll say, but professor, I have an objection. What about this? How would a natural law thinker answer this objection? That's good. I encourage that, and I'll try to give an answer. But others won't, and they will scream at you. Or there was another instance. It isn't in the book. I had been teaching Thomas Aquinas, and I had been teaching the concept of natural teleology. You remember before I said we're designed, and everything in us is for something. All of our powers in us are for something. Even our desires are for something. I have a mind; it's for thinking. I have eyes, they're for seeing. I have the power to become aroused to anger. It's for the sake of the defense of endangered goods. And this is natural teleology. Our design is, purposes and meanings are embedded into us. And I had not brought up sex. It comes up often. You wouldn't be surprised. But I hadn't brought up sex. And a student asked a question. He says, well, if that's true, then we were talking about Thomas Aquinas. What would Thomas Aquinas say about this? And he mentioned one of the rather bizarre kinds of sexual behaviors, which is widely practiced in our society. And I know better now than to try to answer questions about weird sexual practices in the classroom, because sometimes people are baiting me. And then, you have online reviews say, professor talks about this in class. So I said, and it was pedagogically better anyway. I said, well, I think you've read enough about Thomas Aquinas to make a stab at answering that question yourself. Class, what do you think? How would he answer this question? And it took him about 5 minutes, and some startling things were said, but they more or less worked out a more or less correct answer to what he would have said about that. And I said, I think you've done very well. That's right. A woman in the front row is sniffling. I said, are you all right? And she says, it's just that this is so mean to these people. I said, to what people? To the people who do those things. I say, how is it mean? It's judging them. It's judging them. It's cruel. And I said, well, nobody has actually judged anything. I haven't heard anybody in the last 5 minutes of conversation say that, even use the word sin or speak of divine judgment or punishment. It's all been about whether this behavior is actually good for beings of our nature. And she said, it's just so mean. And I said, well, look, suppose that you had a friend who was a dope addict. Would it be mean for you to say, you're destroying yourself? I'm speaking to you in love. You have to stop doing that. Well, as I've come to understand, it didn't stop her tears. Fortunately, it was at the end of the period, more or less. But the tears were partly maybe self-pity, partly performative. They demonstrate, see, I'm a victim here. You're a big mean professor who shouldn't be saying these things and shouldn't be allowing other students to say those things. These things should not be allowed to be discussed because they hurt my feelings. And how do you deal with these things? You can't ignore them. A student was angry with me in class one day. And the question of God had come up. Thomas Aquinas talks about God, gives arguments for the existence of God. And the student was angry, and I said, you seem to be angry. And he said, yeah, I guess I am. I said, okay, why do you think you're angry? And he said, because I don't agree with you. And I said, but I don't agree with you, and I'm not angry with you. So that couldn't be why you're angry. Really, then, why do you think you're angry? And he said, I'm sorry. And I said, I'm not scolding you. I'm just trying to say, why are you angry? And he said, I guess it must be that I don't want to hear what you've got to say. And I said, okay, then the real question for you, and I'm not asking you to answer it right here in the classroom, but you should answer it yourself. Why don't you want to hear it? And I took the next student. His face changed. His anger was gone, and he was different. I never learned in the case of that student whether I'd gotten through, but I think I may have partly. So even anger, even crying, even screaming can sometimes be put to use. Not your screaming, not the teacher screaming and crying, but even when some student goes nuts, it's helpful. It may illustrate something to the other students too.
Yeah, great. I think that's a perfect segue into my final question, which is what stewardship means to you. And I think you just gave some great examples of, as a professor, how to be a great steward of your students. And maybe you can extrapolate that to just teaching in general, and how to help people see the truth in a way that actually is effective and also is done with charity. And those examples definitely demonstrate that. So first, answer that question of what you think stewardship means, and any other lessons for us who are trying to steward the next generation and ourselves, and how to be logical and to avoid the pandemic of lunacy.
Well, I'm going to answer this in two parts. You mentioned doing this in charity, and I think that's essential. When I was a very young, untenured professor, when I first came back to faith in God, I began to care about my students more and to care about whether they understood the truth. And it crushed me, and I just about burned out. You would think that coming back to faith saves you from being burned out, but it was a sort of a faith crisis. I mean, I was really struggling teaching because so many of them were just not interested in truth at all. And I realized that the problem was me. I wasn't loving them enough. I had to love my students. I had to pray for my students. How could I be a good steward of what God's given me with them if I was just doing as a technical exercise and presenting arguments or something? I have to love them. But the other aspect, what does stewardship mean to me? It means that I have to put everything that I have at God's disposal because I got it all from Him in the first place. I have a sharper mind in some respects than a lot of people, but when I was young, I didn't steward that resource as I should have. I let it feed my intellectual pride, and I wanted to be God myself, and Budziszewski to be God instead of God to be God. That's not putting it at God's disposal. I think we have to put everything at His disposal. And that takes different forms. I'm a teacher. I can do this in the classroom. Somebody might do this as a father or a mother or a housewife. Somebody might do this in business. How can I treat my employees well and my shareholders well and provide services and products that actually do people some good instead of doing them some harm? But what it means for you in particular is going to depend. Well, you're going to have to pray to God and ask Him, how can I use my gifts? But you have to identify those gifts and put them completely at His disposal.
Well, that seems like. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
That's a great answer. No, that's it.
Thanks.
And I just want to close with a couple of plugs. First, you can find us at taylorforgon.com for any of your financial needs in terms of investment advice. We've got a mutual fund. We've also got a family office where you can get everything: tax, estate planning, and investment advice in one place. But more importantly, I want to bring some more attention to Dr. Budziszewski's work. You can find him at his website is The Underground Thomist. And if you look through Amazon, you will see that he's got a lot of books and they are very well rated. The one that captures my eyes is I just was aware of this today, but the How to Stay Christian in College, 4.6 stars, over 212 ratings. But it was written way back in 2014. Think the world
Earlier
probably
than that, it was reissued, a new edition.
Do you have a new edition? You've updated it for the
No,
post-Trump
it
world?
was first written way back in the 90s.
Okay. So even older than that. So that seems like the kind of thing you could refresh that every 10 years, maybe every 5 years, and it would need it and get value out of it. So, so please check out his work. And again, his latest book right here, The Pandemic of Lunacy. Here, it's very, very readable. And I think one thing you wanted to make sure we made clear is this is not a book for natural law professors. Obviously, you could read that and learn something, but this is for the common people who are trying to think clearly. Correct?
That's right. We're trying to get back to common sense. I don't mean stupid common sense. We have to affirm our common sense, but elevate it. And that's the object. If I may, I should mention that
Sure.
your listeners can get a 15% discount on the book if they get it at the publisher's website, Creed and Culture, and use the discount code pandemic15.
Okay.
Oh, I sound like one of those guys who do commercials on QVC or something.
That's quite all right. No, we're happy to do it. We're happy to support you and support Jeremy. They've got a lot of interesting books coming out, and we love the work that Creed and Culture is doing. It's definitely, I know enough to know that the book publishing business is a labor of love. So please support Dr. Budziszewski, support Creed and Culture, and buy the books. There's something for any right thinking person, I think, there. And then again, you can see what you're up to on a regular basis at the just www.undergroundthomist.org.
Skip the www. Underground Thomist with a TH.
Okay.
.org will get you there better.
Okay, even better, even quicker. And I see. How often do you have new postings there?
The blog, most of it is not a blog. I mean, I've got articles and all kinds of things there and links to my books. But the blog itself, I usually post on Mondays.
All right. Well, again, thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Budziszewski.
It's been a great pleasure.
It's been great having you, and it was nice to meet you. You're a delight, and thank you for all the great work you're doing at a place that isn't set up. But also, thanks to the University of Texas for giving you a forum and tenure and keeping you.
Yeah. I'm grateful, and there are a lot of good things happening there. You mentioned the Civitas Institute. There's also the new School of Civic Leadership, and you mentioned a number of my colleagues who are doing great work, and I really want to take off my hat to them.
It's my junior in high school's number one choice for school right now, I think, is UT, but he lives in Arizona, so the economics might be working against us. So we'll see what happens. All right. So thank you very much, Doctor. And
thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Take care.
Remember, just steward.